I've known Andy and Ernie a long time, and, well, I'm just proud to be a friend of theirs. They're great guys, they make some great music, and that's what they're about to do now.
Andy Griffith and Don Knotts were once the most beloved duo on television, but the real story behind their friendship is far more complicated than anyone watching The Andy Griffith Show ever realized. Hidden tensions shaped their work, misunderstandings pushed them apart, and years later Don finally spoke about Andy in a way no one expected. In the final hours of Don's life, Andy appeared at his bedside, and what passed between them in that room changed everything people thought they knew. The duo everyone loved. For years, Andy Griffith and Don Knotts were one of television's most beloved duos, the calm sheriff and the frantic deputy whose partnership defined an era of classic American comedy. Viewers believed their on-screen friendship was the same in real life, and in many ways it was. But behind the scenes, their journey was far more complicated than the charm of Mayberry suggested. Their partnership was shaped by pressures, decisions, and tensions the audience never saw. Don Knotts and Andy Griffith crossed paths for the first time in 1955, during the Broadway production of No Time for Sergeants, at a time when their careers were still taking shape. Griffith was gaining national attention after the success of his 1953 monologue, What It Was Football, and Knotts was a nervous young comic trying to break into television. They were, as Don later described, two Southern guys alone in Manhattan, learning how to survive the pressure of Broadway while figuring out the future. Andy had a calm, steady presence. Don had quick, jittery energy that made everything he did feel spontaneous. The contrast between them gave their scenes a rhythm that felt natural from the start, and that early connection would become the foundation for one of the most beloved partnerships in television history. A few years later, when The Andy Griffith Show went into development at CBS, Andy remembered the spark he had with Don on stage. He understood Don's comedy worked best when placed next to a steady anchor, and Andy knew he could be that anchor. Don reached out to Andy to see whether the new show might have a space for him. Andy welcomed him immediately, and television history began. The show premiered on October 3, 1960, introducing viewers to the quiet, fictional town of Mayberry. Andy Griffith played Sheriff Andy Taylor, a patient, level-headed father who guided his community with common sense rather than force. While Don Knotts played Deputy Barney Fife, the enthusiastic but easily overwhelmed second-in-command whose mistakes were often as endearing as they were chaotic. What made the show work wasn't just the humor, but the relationship between Andy and Don. Their characters balanced each other naturally, just like they did off-stage. Andy trusted Don completely. He understood how Don's comedic energy worked and knew exactly how to create space for it. Don, in turn, admired Andy's ability to stay calm under pressure and maintain control of a scene without ever overshadowing anyone. The impact of Don's performance was immediate. He delivered a level of physical comedy, timing, and character depth that television hadn't seen before. Between 1961 and 1967, Don won 5 Emmy Awards for his portrayal of Barney Fife, a rare achievement not only for a sitcom actor but for any performer in that era. Those awards weren't just tokens of popularity. They were recognition of the extraordinary skill behind a character many viewers assumed came easily to him. Meanwhile, The Andy Griffith Show became one of the most beloved programs in American television. It consistently ranked in the top 10 Nielsen ratings, and its final season closed out at number 1, a rare feat for any show, much less one built around small-town life and gentle humor. The writing avoided loud storylines or fast-paced plots, relying instead on quiet moments, character-driven comedy, and values that resonated across the country. But while millions of viewers saw a picture-perfect partnership on screen, the real story behind the scenes was far more complicated. Fame, pressure, and creative control all played a role in shaping what happened behind the scenes, and not all of it was as peaceful as life in Mayberry appeared. The tensions behind the scenes. The world saw The Andy Griffith Show as a calm, friendly place where problems were small and the laughter came easily. But behind the camera, the atmosphere was more complex. The cast cared about the work, yet the pressure to keep the show running smoothly often created strain. Some of the tension stayed quiet for years, while other moments eventually came out through interviews and memories shared by those who were there. One of the most surprising sources of friction came from Frances Bavier, who played Aunt B. On-screen, she was warm, patient, and gentle, but off-screen, she was private, serious, and easily bothered by chaos around her. She and Andy Griffith respected each other professionally, but their personalities didn't always match. Frances preferred structure and calm, while the set often moved at Andy's pace, with quick decisions, last-minute changes, and a working style shaped by instinct rather than strict routines. This difference led to moments of tension, and Frances sometimes felt unsettled by the loose, joking environment around her. Years later, she regretted some of the strain, but during filming, the disconnect between them remained noticeable. Andy himself brought a mix of strengths and challenges to the set. He was talented, focused, and deeply invested in the quality of the show. But that commitment often came with perfectionism, and cast members remembered how seriously he took even the smallest details. Andy had grown up facing bullying and insecurity, and some of that old pressure carried into adulthood. When the workload grew or a scene wasn't landing the way he wanted, he could become tense. He didn't lash out often, but the cast could sense when he was frustrated. His desire to keep every moment controlled sometimes made the set feel heavier than the gentle tone of the series suggested. This perfectionism appeared most clearly in how Andy handled dialogue. Ron Howard, who played young Opie Taylor, recalled how Andy pushed for a slower, more natural rhythm in conversations. Andy believed the charm of Mayberry came from unhurried, thoughtful pacing, and he wanted every scene to feel real. That meant retakes, adjustments, and long discussions about tone and timing. Ron admired Andy's approach, but it also made filming more demanding. The pace was slower than most sitcoms, and the cast had to adjust to Andy's careful style. These pressures didn't always cause open conflict, but they created an environment that required patience from everyone involved. And as the seasons went on, some cast members left the show, adding a new layer of speculation. Each time a familiar character disappeared, viewers wondered what was happening behind the scenes. Some assumed the set was troubled. Others thought people were simply ready to move on. But the truth sat somewhere in between. The show was successful, but the long hours, strict expectations, and Andy's desire to keep the tone consistent made the work tiring over time. Still, the cast continued to perform at a high level, and the audience never sensed the strain. On-screen, Mayberry remained the peaceful town everyone loved. Off-screen, the cast worked hard to keep that illusion alive, even when the environment wasn't as smooth as it appeared. Yet one departure would change everything, a moment that changed the entire direction of the show and left fans confused and disappointed. Rumors spread quickly, theories grew, and viewers wanted answers. What they didn't know was that the decision came from a mix of professional uncertainty and personal challenges brewing behind the scenes. Why Knotts left the show? For many fans, Don Knotts leaving the Andy Griffith Show after its 5th season felt unthinkable. The partnership between Andy and Don had become the heart of Mayberry, and their chemistry was the reason millions tuned in every week. But behind the scenes, a misunderstanding that neither man could undo set the stage for Don's departure. During the 5th season in 1965, Andy Griffith told Don that he planned to end the series after the next year. Andy was tired, the workload was heavy, and he believed the show had reached its natural closing point. Don took him at his word. He had spent years building his career around the show, and if it was ending, he needed to secure his future. Don was in his 40s, raising a family, and unsure when another major opportunity would come along. And with that in mind, he began looking for long-term work that could support him once Mayberry wrapped. Universal Studios soon approached him with a 5-film contract, something few television comedians of the time were offered. The deal promised steady income, creative freedom, and a chance to build a film career that didn't depend on the fate of the show. Believing Andy's plan to end the series was final, Don signed the contract. But the situation changed. As the 5th season progressed, CBS made it clear to Andy that they wanted the show to continue. Ratings were high, the audience was loyal, and Mayberry had become one of the network's strongest programs. Under that pressure, and with the success still growing, Andy chose to keep the series going. By then, Don was already committed to Universal. He had signed the contract in good faith, assuming the show's end was certain. Returning was no longer simple. His schedule, obligations, and legal agreements had all shifted. Andy understood the situation, but the miscommunication created a gap between them that couldn't be reversed. Fans were devastated. Barney Fife had become one of television's most iconic characters, and viewers struggled to imagine the show without him. Letters came in, newspapers commented on the change, and many believed the dynamic of the series had been affected. Even Andy later admitted that the show was never the same after Don left. The heart of the humor, which was the balance between Andy's calm presence and Don's frantic energy, couldn't be recreated. Don moved on to his film career, starring in a series of lighthearted comedies that fit his style perfectly. He led movies like The Ghost and Mr. Chicken in 1966 and The Reluctant Astronaut the following year, both of which performed well and helped establish him as a reliable comedic star beyond television. His success in films showed that the Universal contract had been the right choice professionally, even if the timing created emotional distance between him and Andy. Years later, Don returned to television in a major way as Ralph Furley on Three's Company from 1979 to 1984. The role introduced him to a new generation of viewers and proved his staying power in an industry that often moved quickly past its older stars. While his work on The Andy Griffith Show remained his most beloved achievement, Don built a long career that extended far beyond Mayberry. Still, the way he left the show stayed in the background of his friendship with Andy for years. They stayed in touch, respected each other, and occasionally reunited on screen, but the easy rhythm of their early years never fully returned. And while fans often focused on the cheerful memories of Mayberry, the truth was that both men were carrying personal struggles that rarely surfaced in public, struggles that shaped their friendship in ways most people never realized. The dark side of their friendship. The friendship between Andy Griffith and Don Knotts looked easy and light from the outside, but underneath it were two men shaped by very different kinds of pain. Their connection was real, yet both carried private struggles that influenced how they worked, how they interacted, and how they handled the pressures around them. Andy's difficulties began long before he ever stepped on a stage. He grew up in a small North Carolina town where childhood wasn't simple. He was bullied often and teased in ways that cut deeply, and he never forgot those early experiences. They shaped how he viewed himself, and even later in life, when he was successful and admired, some of that old insecurity stayed with him. People who worked with him noticed the tension that surfaced when scenes weren't going well or when stress built on set. Andy didn't explode often, but when he did, the frustration came from a place that had been growing inside him since he was young. Those early wounds also connected to the challenges he faced at home. Andy married 3 times, and each marriage brought its own strain. His first marriage to Barbara Edwards, which lasted through the early years of his fame, ended in divorce in 1972. But the breakup wasn't sudden. It came after years of distance, long working hours, and the pressure of carrying a hit television show. Andy was a private man, so details rarely reached the public, but insider reports noted that the marriage had been under stress for a long time. There were also reports of affairs during different points in his life, moments where the demands of success and the weight of personal history influenced his decisions. Andy was never portrayed publicly as a reckless figure, but behind the wholesome image, he sometimes made choices that complicated his relationships. His drinking habits also played a role during certain periods of his life. It wasn't constant, but those who knew him well said it surfaced during moments when he struggled to manage stress or when his anger from earlier years returned. Even his health added another layer to the challenges he carried. In 1983, Andy developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, a serious condition that attacks the nerves and muscles. It left him temporarily paralyzed and forced him into a long recovery. For someone who always fought to feel in control, losing physical strength so suddenly was devastating. The recovery was slow, painful, and emotionally draining, yet he pushed through it, returning to acting and public life, though never quite as strong as before. Through it all, Don Knotts remained one of the steady presences in Andy's life. Their friendship had its quiet periods, especially after Don left the show, but the connection never disappeared. When they did reconnect, it was as if they understood each other's history without needing to explain anything. Andy admired Don's discipline and the way he handled life with less intensity. Don respected Andy's drive and his determination to overcome whatever stood in his way. Their bond was built on what they shared on screen, but it also rested on the things they never said aloud, the fears, the disappointments, and the pressure each of them felt to live up to the image the public expected. Andy Griffith lived a long life, but it wasn't always an easy one. He passed away on July 3, 2012, at age 86. His death brought back memories of the golden years of the Andy Griffith Show, the gentle world of Mayberry, and the partnership that had shaped American television. But behind all the nostalgia were two men who had worked hard to hold themselves together while the world believed they lived inside the warmth of the town they portrayed. And while Andy faced his own battles, Don Knotts faced lifelong battles of his own, many of them far heavier than his cheerful on-screen persona ever suggested. People who knew Don admired his talent, but very few understood how much strength it took for him to perform the way he did. Don grew up in a home marked by instability. His father struggled with severe mental illness, and the household felt unpredictable and unsafe. Don was still a child when he began witnessing behavior that left lasting emotional scars. He learned early how to stay quiet, how to move carefully, and how to hide fear behind humor. That coping mechanism became the foundation of his comedy. As Don entered adulthood, those early experiences didn't disappear. He battled anxiety throughout his life, not mild nervousness, but deep, overwhelming episodes that sometimes made ordinary tasks difficult. He also suffered from panic attacks, which he hid from almost everyone around him. Fans saw a confident performer with perfect timing. They didn't see the private moments when Don struggled to calm himself before a scene or the long nights when fear settled in for no clear reason. Insomnia became another constant companion. Don often had trouble sleeping, especially during demanding periods of work. He would stay awake for hours, unable to quiet his thoughts, then show up on set the next morning ready to deliver flawless comedic performances. His dedication was remarkable, but it came at a cost. The lack of rest made his anxiety more intense, creating a cycle that followed him for most of his life. His personal relationships were also affected by these internal battles. Don married Catherine Metz in 1947, long before fame found him. They raised 2 children together, but the pressures of his early career, the constant auditions, the unstable income, and his growing emotional burden slowly pulled them apart. As Don's success grew, the demands on his time increased, and by 1964, the marriage ended. A decade later, he married Loralee Chuchna in 1974. She entered his life during a period when he was trying to balance steady work with his struggle to control anxiety and chronic stress. Loralee supported him, but the pressures of fame, travel, and Don's ongoing health challenges made the marriage difficult. Don often retreated into himself when overwhelmed, and maintaining emotional closeness became harder. By 1983, they divorced. His third marriage to Frances Yarborough began in 2002 when Don was in his later years. Frances brought calm into his life. She understood his quiet nature, accepted his health limitations, and stayed close during the periods when his anxiety spiked. Their marriage lasted until Don's death, giving him stability he had rarely experienced earlier. Friends later said Frances helped him feel less alone, especially in moments when he struggled privately. Despite his fame, the awards, and the affection from millions of viewers, Don lived with loneliness more often than people realized. He had a gentle personality but carried self-doubt that never fully left him. The applause from audiences didn't silence the internal voice that questioned his worth, and the warm characters he played didn't erase the emotional distance he sometimes felt from others. Depression cycled through his life at different points, usually quietly, because Don rarely spoke openly about his pain. Still, he kept working, he kept showing up, he kept delivering performances that required precise timing and emotional balance, even on days when he barely slept or pushed through intense anxiety. And as he moved into the final years of his life, the public saw a familiar smile and steady grace. But privately, Don continued navigating health challenges and emotional weight that he had carried since childhood. His later years brought peace in some ways, but they also brought the fragile awareness of time passing, friendships fading, and his own body slowing down. the final years of Don Knotts. In his later years, Don Knotts kept working long after many expected him to retire. Through the 1990s, he continued appearing in films, guest roles, and voice work. Audiences still recognized his unmistakable style, the nervous expressions, the sharp timing, and the warmth that had carried him through decades of performances. Even as new generations discovered him, Don stayed humble about his career and focused on doing the kind of work he enjoyed. But behind the scenes, his health began to decline. Don dealt with pulmonary issues, struggled with macular degeneration that slowly weakened his vision, and later faced a battle with cancer. These challenges didn't stop him from acting, but they made the work more demanding. Don stayed positive, even when the treatments and appointments became part of his weekly routine. He never wanted pity, and he rarely talked about his struggles unless he had to. In his final months, as Don grew weaker, he spent more time resting at home in Los Angeles. He kept a small circle of visitors, people who had known him for years and understood his quiet nature. Among them was Andy Griffith. Despite the misunderstandings and distance that had come between them during their careers, their friendship remained intact. When Andy learned Don didn't have much time left, he went to see him. During the visit, Andy reportedly talked to Don the same way he had decades earlier, making small jokes, light comments, and trying to bring a little comfort into the room. Even near the end, their rhythm was the same. Andy steady and calm, Don responding with the soft smile he had carried throughout his life. It was a private moment that showed the connection they had shared since their days in No Time for Sergeants. Don Knotts passed away on February 24, 2006, at the age of 81. He was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery, a quiet location that has become the resting place of many well-known actors. The news of his death brought an outpouring of respect from fans, colleagues, and generations of viewers who had grown up watching him. Many said the same thing. Even through a screen, Don made people feel lighter. His final years showed the same determination he carried his entire life, working through discomfort, maintaining friendships, and holding on to humor even when things were difficult. And before he passed, Don took time to speak honestly about the people who shaped his journey, including Andy Griffith. The truth about their friendship. Before Don Knotts died, he finally opened up about the relationship he shared with Andy Griffith, a partnership that shaped both of their careers and left a permanent mark on American television. Andy was a friend, but he was also a strong, demanding figure who took full responsibility for the success of The Andy Griffith Show. Don respected that balance and understood how it shaped their work together. Don described Andy as the ideal straight man. In interviews before his death, he explained that Andy's timing and restraint were incredible, and that trying to make Andy laugh actually pushed him to be funnier. He said Andy was the best straight man he could imagine, and that their scenes worked because Andy knew exactly when to hold back and when to react. Don also gave Andy direct credit for allowing Barney Fife to exist the way fans remember him. Instead of controlling every move, Andy let Don shape the nervous gestures, the frantic line deliveries, and the panicked reactions that defined Barney. Don said Andy gave him room to work, and that this freedom made all the difference in what he was able to do on the show. He was also honest about the decision to leave The Andy Griffith Show. Don admitted that if he had known Andy was going to continue the series, he never would have signed the long-term film deal that forced him to move on. He didn't frame the departure as a betrayal or a feud, but as a heartbreaking misunderstanding and a business decision made at the wrong moment. Biographer Daniel DeVise notes that even after Don left, the two remained best friends for life, and Andy was among the last people to visit Don before he died. Years later, Andy shared his own view of their partnership, and the respect was just as strong. He repeatedly called Don the funniest man he ever worked with, and said that some of the best moments on The Andy Griffith Show came straight from Don's ideas and improvisations. Andy said the years they spent making the series together were the best years of his professional life. Later accounts and reporting based on DeVise's book make it clear that, away from the camera, both men were more complex than their TV characters. Although they clashed at times, they kept coming back to their mutual loyalty and shared history. When Don's health failed in the mid-2000s, Andy traveled across the country to see him in the hospital. Insider reports revealed that their final visit wasn't the heavy, scripted farewell many expected. Andy spoke to Don much like he always had, mixing concern with light, familiar talk and encouraging him to keep fighting, to keep breathing, even when Don was barely conscious. Andy later said he believed Don could still hear him. After Don died, Andy struggled with something very specific. He worried about Don's soul. According to DeVries, Andy, who had a strong Christian faith, wondered whether Don had ever fully come to terms with belief in God and whether he would see him again in the afterlife. That question stayed with Andy until he spoke at Don's funeral. There, he stated plainly that he believed Don was in paradise and that there was a place for him in God's kingdom. That public declaration finally helped Andy find peace with the loss. Years later, when Don's wife shared one of Don's last remarks about the great wizard in the sky taking him away, Andy took comfort in the idea that Don, in his own way, had been thinking about what came next, and this settled one of his deepest worries. Andy and Don's friendship survived because both men showed up for each other, on set, off set, in success, and in the moments that were hardest to talk about. Don knew exactly what Andy had done for him. Andy knew exactly what Don brought into his life. And by the time both of their stories were nearly finished, the picture was clear. Whatever people assumed about them, the bond they built stayed in place, long after the cameras shut down and Mayberry was only a memory. What do you think about the way Don Knotts left the Andy Griffith Show? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.